I'm Justin Barrett, president of Blueprint 1543. Blueprint 1543 is an organization very much interested in bringing the best of the sciences together with theological insights and wisdom to address big problems in the world. So many of the challenges we face as individuals, as societies, as a global community are really theologically inflected when we start looking at them very carefully, but they can also be very much informed and maybe energized in a positive kind of way with insights, tools, evidence from the sciences. And at Blueprint, we want to see that kind of integration with the sciences and theological thought. But what you will not hear us talk a lot about at Blueprint 1543 is science, capital S, one word, and religion, capital R, either. And there's a reason for that. Lots of other folks who work in the same kind of space that we do will sometimes use that language, and occasionally we will, but usually we avoid it. And there are, again, good reasons for that. One of those is that science, capital S, science, well, just doesn't exist. That may be a surprise because lots of us, went to grade school or something like that where we went to science class, and if there's a whole class about it, it must be a thing. But really, that was just shorthand, science, for a subject space of all kinds of ways of interacting with, learning about, exploring the natural world. But the truth of the matter is, when philosophers of science and historians of science have started looking carefully at what is this thing, science, that we call science, they can't actually come up with very good boundaries on what's in and what's out. It's easier to talk about how do we scientifically explore the natural world? How do we scientifically come to certain kinds of understandings? And scientific kind of understandings just blend with other kinds of rational, empirical, that means evidence-based, kinds of explorations of the natural world. That's what we mean by scientific knowing, is knowing that's been infused by those kinds of approaches that have been developed in the last few hundred years to help us get a better grasp on what's going on in the natural world. But you don't have to use the sciences to explore the natural world. There are all kinds of people who are just keen observers of, say, the migration patterns of birds, or how certain types of soil conditions or weather conditions affect crop yields, or whatever it is. Just good, careful observation. Well, that's not usually what's meant by science or the sciences as we know them in the modern universities. What we mean is modes of inquiry that have developed lots of practices that help us see more clearly what causal relationships are, usually through experimentation or other kinds of statistical control and other ways of really figuring out which variables are affecting other variables in the world around us. We could go on and talk a whole lot about what are these sort of sciencey and less sciencey and more sciencey and other sciencey kinds of areas. All it takes is reading, books like Paul Dickens' book here, Getting Science Wrong, Why the Philosophy of Science Matters, and others like it, and you very quickly discover there is no thing called science. There are the sciences, there are more scientific and less scientific ways of knowing, but there are no hard boundaries around what constitutes a science. And then if that's the problem for science, it's a challenge for religion as well. And I don't know what voice I should use with religion. I don't know, something like that. But again, we have similar kinds of problems. Scholars who've been trying to study religious beliefs, practices, identities, over the organizations over the past 150 years or so just have not converged on any kind of well-regarded consensus type of definition what religion is. And these are smart people doing their best. You often see competing camps about what kinds of definitions capture this idea of religion, but really no one's satisfied. Are they the practices that draw us together as communities, that give us meaning and significance? Well, then does baseball count as a religion? And would maybe somebody's particular kinds of belief in in gods that doesn't do that because they're all by themselves not count as religion? Or, okay, well, then maybe religion is about supernatural beings. Well, then why is it that there seem to be these cultural forms that look very much religious that deny that there are any supernatural beings? Or belief systems that Eliminate the distinction between the natural and the supernatural. Who's to decide where that line is? There are all kinds of complexities with any definitions of religion that you want to offer. And so that starts to make me think, well, maybe religion isn't a thing after all. Another sort of support for that idea is the work of historians and intellectual historians like Peter Harrison, who in his, for instance, his Territories of Science and Religion, among other books, has shown that these concepts that we use today of science and religion are actually relatively recent inventions. They're historically situated, they're culturally situated, and they don't apply in all times and places. You can't talk about the science of, say, the 3rd century and the religion of the 3rd century and mean the same thing as you do now. It just doesn't even make sense. And that may be surprising to those of us who have been raised up in certain kinds of cultural environments and taught over and over again that there's this thing science and there's this thing religion. But the real experts who are looking at this don't think that there are these two things, that the boundaries are fuzzy at best. And so at Blueprint, we try to avoid treating those as if they are these two entities out there. And one of the big reasons why is whatever these things are, if they are things at all, they overlap. They're not distinct. And yet by labeling them two different things, we often get sort of pulled into that trap of dichotomous thinking there's this science stuff and there's this religious stuff. And it completely excludes the possibility that there are, I don't know, religious scientists out there who their faith perspective motivates, informs, and grounds their scientific inquiry. And those scientific discoveries in turn fuel and feed their faith commitments, how they live out their religious commitments in the world. Once we start talking about science and religion as these two encapsulated separate things, we lose that possibility of genuine integration. We also run the risk of treating them as if they are equivalent competing things, as if somehow they're the same sort of thing. And they're just not. My friend Bob McCauley wrote this cool book, Why Religion is Natural and Science is Not, an Oxford University Press publication. And in it, he makes the observation that science, what we usually call of science or the sciences, are a relatively recent cultural invention that require an enormous amount of social support in order for them to keep going, because they're not very natural. They don't fit the way that humans naturally work. They take a lot of discipline, education, special mathematics skills, special language, labs, equipment, all of this support to keep going. Well, that's not true of religious systems, right? Our religious practices, governments have tried to stomp them out and they do not go away because they're much more a natural part of what it means to be a human being. They seem to psychologically, whatever these spaces are, to psychologically be very different kinds of things from each other. And so then sort of treating them as if they're equivalent and maybe at war or something else is just misleading. It's intellectually uninformed. So for these reasons and many others that I could talk about at length, but it would get tiresome, at Blueprint we don't really talk about science and religion. We try to avoid that language. Instead, we want to talk about, and we are interested in, and how do we get scientists who are people of faith to embrace the intellectual resources of their faith tradition, their theological tradition, as good fuel for doing science, scientific inquiry, I should say, for doing that kind of scientific work, to motivate that. How do we get theologically informed thinkers, religious leaders, and just folks trying to live out their faith the best that they can in the real world, to use the tools of the sciences to give them new insights, to give them, I don't know, better ways of going about loving God and loving each other. That's the kind of thing we're about at Blueprint 1543. If you're interested in our vision, then by all means, check out the rest of our resources on our website and find out how maybe you could work with us or support what we're doing. Thanks for watching and keep following Blueprint 1543.